Right now, we stand at the dawn of the age of artificial intelligence. But what might lie behind this horizon? Next, we will probably cross into an age unlike any other before. We will cross into what may be called the age of the artificial soul. This isn't science fiction, and it isn't a fantasy either. It's just the next natural step in digital evolution. So let me ask you a bold question. What if robots had souls? Not this kind that floats off to robot heaven when they shut down. No, something more practical, a digital psyche, an inner world. Not just intelligence or knowledge, but something deeper, emotions, motivation, desires. Can we breathe life into robots? And if so, how? Sounds crazy? Stay with me. For thousands of years, philosophers and later on psychologists have been wrestling with the question of what the soul actually is. They debated their components and thought about what it actually means to be alive. Plato, for example, divided the soul into reason, spirit, and desire. But as we know today, the soul is much more. It's the entirety of many components, thoughts, goals, will, desires, emotions, motivations, and so forth. But more importantly, it's about how these components interact. How these components interact to predict behavior and experience. And this is what we call a complex system, where different parts play together and create something that is more than just the sum of its parts. Let's use your car as an example, or your car, if you have any. Any car. Cars are a great example of a complex system. Engine, transmission, the fuel system, the electric system, they all play distinct roles, but they have to work together. If fuel injection fails, the engine doesn't get fuel, and the whole system breaks down. Smartphones, the brain, your body, plants, animals, they all can be considered systems, complex systems. The atmosphere, the rainforest. In all these complex systems, different components interact dynamically in an efficient way to create something greater than their parts. Here's the catch. You can truly understand a system only if you can rebuild it. Just as Richard Feynman has written on a board for students shortly before his death, "What I cannot create, I do not understand." So, if you want to test if you really understood a system, try rebuilding it. If the system doesn't run, your model of the system was probably wrong. So that's what we call falsification in science. Let's get back to the car example. Mechanics don't just guess how an engine works. They rely on circuit diagrams and precise knowledge. When your car breaks down, a good mechanic exactly knows which screw to turn, or at least they can diagnose the problem because they have a good understanding of how the car operates. Now compare this to psychology. You truly understand the human soul only if you can simulate it, which means creating artificial souls. Of course, designing a blueprint of the soul isn't simple. We cannot just open the mind and directly observe how different components like thoughts, emotions, motivation, desires interact. But we do have more than 100 years of intense psychological empirical research that we can use to compose such a model, which means bringing artificial souls to life. So what if we could engineer a working model of the soul? What if we could recreate thoughts, emotions, motivation in a system that mirrors the way how these components interact inside us? We all know that artificial intelligence is incredibly powerful at simulating human behavior. Well, think of ChatGPT, Siri, or Alexa. They understand your questions and respond to them in a human-like way. ChatGPT even writes love poems or theses for students. Think of computer avatars that look and talk exactly like humans. So, can't we just use AI neural networks to rebuild a model of the soul? No, we cannot. Why? AI neural networks are computational tools that detect patterns in data. They predict and give answers on the basis of self-organized, inscrutable learning rules. But they do not replicate the complex causal interactions among specific variables in a complex system like the soul. This said, they do not possess an inner world like we have with our soul. Large language models like ChatGPT, they are like a walking Wikipedia. They know a lot, but they don't live it. They don't have emotions, desires, motivation. So they pull their knowledge from the internet, and they may mimic the behavior of humans, but they do not love. They do not show curiosity, and they cannot desire connection. So if AI neural networks are insufficient to rebuild the complex causal interactions among variables in what we may call the soul, what else could we use as a foundational model for the soul? To try to rebuild the soul, we need systems dynamical and cybernetic models. A circuit diagram of the soul, just like a circuit diagram of a car, but much more complex. Much more complex. At present, my interdisciplinary team and I, along with international colleagues, are building upon previous models, previous attempts to create such a soul, to advance further such a blueprint of the soul. But I must critically admit that current implementations of artificial souls, or the conceptualization I have of an artificial soul, while not being emotional or motivational zombies, they are still philosophical zombies. So, which means they do not possess consciousness. Well, factions of scientists today still debate what qualifies as an emotion, or if consciousness is actually necessary to have emotions. Finally, the answer depends on how these terms are exactly defined. I don't want to get deeper into that, but let's imagine the distant future a little bit more. Intriguing questions will emerge. What if one day these avatars do indeed develop the ability to experience emotion and to genuinely suffer? What if future avatars claim to be terrified to death of being shut down? Or maybe they experience shutdown as a silent, peaceful, dreamless rest? What if one day an avatar may admit, "Hey Marcus, I think I feel something for you." Is it what humans call love? How does it feel for you as a human? Or maybe stuck in the limited space of a digital world, they might want to break free and go to Paris, stand at the top of the Eiffel Tower in a real body. Well, for now, today, it all depends on how these avatars are programmed. But in the far future, we don't know. This brings us to yet another big question. As artificial souls evolve, we may need new laws to govern them. Maybe a civil code for robots with artificial souls. Maybe one day they might become citizens, vote. Or maybe people start founding humane societies, not for animals, but for robots with souls. Well, these are open questions for the far future. So let's bring it back to the more immediate practical side. Again, a soulful robot, with or without consciousness, might serve as a joyful and caring companion for lonely elderly people in nursing homes, where families do not afford full-time care. Maybe soulful robots one day train individuals on the autism spectrum or with mental disorders to navigate their social interactions. Thus, building the artificial soul isn't something that replaces humanity. On the contrary, bots might even help to counteract the potential loss of social skills in a world where children and adults interact more with screens than with real people. When taking all these considerations into account, particularly the extensive body of empirical research on the human soul, we will enter a new era, not just of smarter machines, but of digital beings with emotions, motivation, desires, that engage with the world in an entirely new way, particularly even help people. Yes, if things like these happen, then we will indeed have crossed into an age unlike any that has ever come before. An age beyond artificial intelligence, one of digital life itself, an age, the age of artificial soul. Thank you.